This is Dave Monk of Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board.
And we have a guest today, Kevin Elliott, who does Joshua Tree Inn on Tuesday, I think. And he's been bicycling. He's an avid bicycler. He may not be a really technical bicycler, but he's gone to Tennessee and he's gone to Florida, and we'll ask him about some of those things. But first, I would like to say something about Alan Steinberg. WEFTies probably know him well because he had an antiquarian bookstore around the corner, just backed onto the backside of WEFT, and Alan was a talkative soul and a book dealer, but we knew him well. He knew WEFT well. He gave us things. I benefited from a small trailer from Alan. We used to live near each other on Prospect Avenue in Champaign. And Alan grew up in New York. He got a bachelor's degree and then started on a master's degree in geology, got drafted to Korea, came back. By that time he had developed his passion for books, so transposed into books, became a book salesman, and eventually came to the U of I as a national bookseller, working with the University of Illinois Press. He enjoyed places like Cranit and would take people to Chicago to theater, and he was a dog lover, and he had a lot to do in retirement with the the Champaign Library. He was president of the library board and later president of a foundation. He had a lot to do with reorganizing the bookstore so that it was profitable and also very pleasant. So we sympathize with Cecile and his family. She has been an active person around town too, as I think a counselor at Carl. But so he actually put together the dog, Champaign's first dog park, and liked his dogs. He flew planes. I did not know he flew planes. So we'll miss the gentleman, and his family will miss him too. So thanks, Alan, for being around and doing interesting things. I didn't mention, but he took the antiquarian bookstore to Campustown, so he was on Wright Street for a while. And just very pleasant, and thank you. So now let's transpose to Kevin Elliott. He is a counselor in real life, but he takes off on a bicycle at regular intervals. And let's have him introduce yourself. Did you grow up here?
I was born just 45 miles south of here in Mattoon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of my youth in these parts, and then we moved around a bit. We moved to California for 4 years when I was in grade school, which was quite an adventure for a 8 through 12-year-old to go out there and see a whole new geography. And then we moved back to Mattoon, then we moved to Iowa, then my family moved back to Charleston, and then I started traveling. I went to Colorado, back to California, Arizona, Oregon, various places, and then ended up back in the Midwest about, I don't know, going on 30 years ago. Yeah. So I've been around a little bit, but this has been my home for most of my life, really.
But it's interesting that you grew up in Mattoon because it's sort of a breaking place. The Civil War came north to about Mattoon, and there were some people who didn't know which side to belong to. So
I believe that. I didn't know that history, but Mattoon seems to be kind of a bit of a cutoff point for a lot of things. The geography changes a little bit south of there, and railroad lines went through there.
Yeah.
We used to hear that Al Capone would come down to cool off in Mattoon. There was the phantom anesthetist of Mattoon during World War II, which some people describe as mass hysteria, as an example of mass hysteria. Everybody thought they were getting gassed through their screen windows by this mad gasser.
There was a high school thing where people were having sexual contact that hit the headlines at one stage.
Oh, yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me either. Mattoon, yeah, it has a sordid little history.
So it has a hospital, Bush Hospital.
Yeah.
And it has railroads going through it.
Yes.
North and south.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a history that's not too far, as you say, from Effingham, which is a terminal marine for a very rich agriculture to the north of there, and a not so rich agriculture south of there.
Yeah. When I was a kid, that was like going to the big city, going to Effingham. Even though Mattoon was bigger than Effingham, it seemed like a real treat when we got to go to Effingham.
It was near Broomcorn territory.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
You had lots of people who had grown broomcorn, and eventually it was brought in from Hungary or from Mexico. And then you got a whole bunch of Mexicans in places like Arcola.
Arcola, yeah. Yeah, Arcola and Tuscola.
Polyglot. Yeah, there was an urban there, I think, too.
Mm-hmm. It's an interest. There's some interesting history in Mattoon. I after I left there, I used to kind of dismiss my upbringing, but then I really kind of made peace with like growing up there, because as I was biking across various parts of the country, I'd encounter towns like Mattoon and find them kind of charming. And then I thought, like, I grew up in one of those places.
Well, there's a little town called Humboldt just up the road.
Well, my mom lived in Humboldt.
Oh, wow.
And Cook's Mills. She lived in Cook's Mills, too. You probably are familiar with that.
Well, that's Amish territory.
Yeah.
Cook's Mills, almost. The Chicago sewer system used to bring down trainloads of sewage to Humboldt. And so there's these ponds there now that are wildlife ponds. And you could find ducks and geese and whatever. They closed it, but this was a lot of sludge.
I heard about something about that. I didn't know the details of that either, but...
Yes, and you have not too far away Tuscola with factories and continuing factories. There's a fertilizer factory going in there at the moment.
Well, Mattoon was like that too. Mattoon, just about everybody I knew in my family grew up on a farm. Not everybody. But there were factories in Mattoon, too. My dad worked for the Blanc company, which built asphalt road pavers, and finally got bought out, then bought out again, Yes. They closed it down. And
ICI was a big name at one stage, but I think there was various buyings. And there's a little church there along the road from Tuscola, which is quite a unique church that was put in by a gentleman that had a certain religious background.
Really? I didn't, yeah.
That more or less towards Atwood and those other places that we talk about from time to time.
Yeah.
So nice to know that you have some local...
I do. I have history here.
We're putting in local trails, and they may or may not interest you because you're mainly a bicyclist who bicycles on the road.
Primarily, I love trails when I encounter them, and sometimes plan my route around them. But I'm used to biking on country roads and through town, and certainly it's easier to do that than it used to be.
You have to have a different bicycle if you're on some trails because they're chip limestone and a narrow-tired bicycle, which I imagine you use on an open road.
I used to use narrow-tired exclusively, but then I got this hybrid that I just love, and that's the one that I took cross-country this year. and it's very versatile. It can ride on just about anything, and it's very comfortable. And as I was telling you earlier, I didn't even get sore on my cross country trip because it fit my body so well. So now I ride that one. But
So we talked to you a little bit about your ride across the country. But,
yeah, we talked about
a little
that.
bit about the Katy Trail.
Yeah, one of my favorite rides. And I understand that Dave rode it too recently. And I like just about everything about the Katy Trail.
So Dave, did you have a comment?
I can concur when he says that it's better to not have narrow tires if you're going to be on something like the Katy Trail, because as you say, that's like your chipped limestone. And when I first went down there, I thought, I would rent a narrow-tired bicycle because it's what I've ridden exclusively for decades now. But yes, you get down there and you look at this trail and you think, I would be murdered if I tried to actually ride a narrow-tired bike, and you'd be squalling all over the trail because it's got gravel all over the place. So you're grateful for the fact that the only kinds of bikes that they rent to you at St. Joseph, the town down there, are standard, a little bit wider tires down there.
Now, I've had kind of a Goldilocks experience with the Katy Trail because I've ridden a narrow-tired bike on it, and many, like over 200 miles, like from Sedalia to the Mississippi River, and just kind of dealt with that, And then one year I decided to ride a mountain bike, and that was a mistake because the tires were too wide, really, and it was made it more difficult and slower. And so now I got to just ride. I got that hybrid, and that was perfect for the Katy
Somewhere
Trail.
in between. I have to say, you could actually experience that same sort of thing around here. Once you get out on the country roads, if you turn down the wrong country road, it's again, they'll have just put the oil and chip down on the roads, and you very quickly turn around and get back where you were and go another mile down and find a better road to go riding on, because you could certainly do it if you had to. I've actually had to ride on roads coming back to town, and I just said, I'm not going to backtrack again to go further away from town, and you just kind of squall around on a really gravelly road. But having my druthers, I'd much rather have a bike like you're talking about to give it a little bit of traction on all of that mess on the roads.
David found a book that explained the success of the Katy Trail. It was it was a railroad that basically runs along the bottomlands, so it's subject to flooding. And that's why it's a little awkward on bicycles, because you come to a place where it's been a flooding in the past, a rail derailment perhaps, and repaired with gravel, and it's a little softer and hard to handle. But the gentleman bought the whole 200 miles, I think. And when people come to meetings, they have to apologize because this is an unusual trail. It's not the one that you had to get the community together to buy and things like that.
The first year we went on that, my wife Sandra and I had been a year of excessive flooding, but we went a little bit later in the year, so most of it was in good shape. There were two places that still had the effects of flooding, including one place that was just impassable, so we had to circle over this levee in order to get around it. But they maintain it very well. It's a state park, and so it's really kept in good shape, good condition, and there's nice little informational displays along the way, and beautiful scenery, and so I like it.
Did you find it interesting too?
I only rode it for about 15 miles heading toward the river out of the town, and then turned around and came back again. And yes, as he says, even in that short distance, there's plenty of stuff to look at. There are plenty of places to pull off. There are like retention ponds that animals will use for breeding and things like that. And so they're good about putting up signs to tell you, here are the principal frogs and birds that you're likely to see wandering around this pond here. So yeah, there's plenty to get you off of your bicycle while you're out there riding along that trail. Talking about the flooding effects, they mention in this book that the trail does not exactly follow the train tracks anymore, because the last time they had one of these major, once in a century floods, it flooded out the trail, and they were told you can't put the trail back there because it's just going to get flooded out again someday. So they actually moved it far enough away from the river that come a comparable flood again someday, hopefully this new area for that trail won't get flooded out once again.
They went up onto the banks of the river on the uplands where the vineyards are, and where a lot of the living is, not on the bottomlands.
Well, it's a really cool trail because for so much of the distance, again, just the 10, 50 miles that I saw of it, you are right there along the Missouri River. And so you just look to your right as you're going out of town, and you can see that the light glinting off of the river. And it's only when you get a few miles out of town, you move far enough away that it's not river to your right, it's cornfields. And then eventually, I think they eventually come back to the river again because they reach a place where it was high enough ground that it didn't get flooded that when they had that flood back in the 90s or something.
And there's one little section where it goes off the crushed limestone gravel trail and wanders through the city of Sedalia. And so you're actually following bike paths through town for at least 5 miles. And that's interesting, too, although, and it's pretty well marked. But it's not as easily clear cut as being right on the trail where
Yes,
you can't go wrong.
There is a sort of a disjunct between the people who ride bikes long distance and the people who ride around the city. There's the cities develop a set of rules, and there's all sorts of bicycle trails that you have to be aware of. And regional planning doesn't necessarily mean going outside the city and how you connect, for instance, from Decatur to Monticello or Urbana to Danville. It's more emphasis has been placed on the bicycle trails in town and how you would cross a street and bicycle rules and things like that.
Yeah, and then that results sometimes in, miscommunication or mistrust between automobile drivers and cyclists and pedestrians. And one of the things that Sandra and I noted when we bicycled in New York City this year at the end of my bike trip was that they now have it down pat pretty well. New York, like Manhattan, is a great place to ride bicycles because all of the pedestrians and cyclists and the cars are all used to each other now. And so people are not nervous anymore, and they just accommodate one another, and there's no high stress or anything.
Does New York have any places where you're bicycling along the far right of the road, and then all of a sudden you need a right turn lane for the cars, and you need to move left so that the cars can move right, and you've got this whole little dance that you have to do. It's one of the most frightening things when you're doing it for the first time, even in a small town like this. Did you ever encounter that in New York?
Well, there's variations on that. Sometimes the bike lane is not to the far right. It's like a lane or two in, or sometimes in the middle, and then you have especially through Central Park, for example, there's bike lanes right through the middle of a road, and so it does require paying very close attention. And then sometimes it is on the right, and there is no accommodation for the cars that are going to turn right, so you have to look at each other and communicate. And often the cars will have a solo bicyclist just go ahead and go and get out of the way and then make their turn. But you're right, that is kind of a stressful point.
Sometimes referred to as a suicide lane.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like when you've got that fifth lane in the middle of the road where people are supposed to be making lefts from one direction and rights from the other.
One of my clients, her brother was killed, unfortunately, because you also have to negotiate people opening their doors if there's a parking, lane too. And so somebody opened their door, and he swerved to avoid that and got hit by a car. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
And the story is, of course, that people in New York are so gruff and unpleasant in general. They would just as soon have the whole town to themselves. It's hard to imagine a city like that learning to cooperate, and what would it be like to be, again, the first-time driver. You're used to being in some other part of town where there are no bicycle lanes, and you're used to just, get out of my way, you don't belong here, and suddenly you're expected to be as well-behaved as all the people who drive on those roads every day.
Yeah. Well, I myself, I know it's that the stereotype of New Yorkers is based on, real experience, but I've just never experienced it. I've always experienced really nice New Yorkers.
Well, the bikers there used to be messengers. They rode in the traffic, and they were very good at doing that, and they could get across town faster than any car could get across.
San Francisco has a lot of those, too. And, of course, it's very hilly there, and so you get a really good athletes being bike messengers in San Francisco. I've seen bike messengers. They also totally ignore traffic laws. So I've seen them meet head on, swerving around the same truck, and knock each other down, then just get up and keep going.
Well, you've been in a different area recently. You have been making a CD in Tennessee.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've been to Florida. So,
Right.
So should we make a little break and throw some of your music just to see, just let people know that you're also a musician?
Yeah, yeah. It's taking up more and more of my focus these days.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I picked out Me and the Kid, but if you've got a preference, I can grab
I think
something
that's
that's
perfectly appropriate
A good
for
song?
traveling.
Yes,
Oh,
he's
right.
been traveling with children.
so
Now, this kid in the song isn't a real kid, just called the kid.
the Kid.
Okay.
So here's a track from Kevin's previous album, and when we come back, we'll talk with him about the one he was just down in Tennessee making. This is from his album It's a Circus Here, Dolores.
Me and the kid, we were running away. Had no ties to bind us, nobody to find us. We were gone in a day. We had $500 and that old panel truck ran out on my lady. The arrangement was shady, but the kid brought me luck. So we headed out west, we drove fast and we drank. We picked up hitchhikers, some wannabe bikers, siphoned gas for our tank. Made it out to LA, tried to locate a friend. We just barely missed her, we crashed with her sister, who was half round the bend. We were all singing our song, singing sloppy but singing strong. Bound to turn out wrong, 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 but didn't last too long. We left early in the morning, hurried north up the coast, hit the Golden Gate City, we depleted our kitty. The kid splits from his post. Feeling homesick and stupid, he sells off his truck. Even though it's December, he flies back to Denver. And there goes my luck. Singing one last song, singing sloppy and singing strong. Bound to turn out wrong, 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 but didn't last too long.
Okay, well, you had fun going to Tennessee. I think you're a visual corridor person. You look at places where you go. So bicycling for you is a trip, and you go inside places. Tell us a little bit about your trip to Tennessee.
Okay.
And then later we'll look at your trip to Florida.
Florida?
With
Yeah.
children.
Yeah, children, a lot of children this time. It's kind of ironic because I don't have good eyesight, but when I'm biking, I think my focus makes up for that. And so on my bike trip this summer, it's funny, I found 25 spoons and I think maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 forks and several knives. And over the years, my wife Sandra and I have found probably between 50 and 100 pieces of silverware on the side of the road. And I expect that if you focused on anything, if you were looking for, particular toys or gloves or anything, you could find 25 of them. But we just ended up focusing on that because we kept noticing that we saw them on the side of the road. And we still don't know why there's so much silverware on the side of the road. Sandra thinks it's kids who eat their yogurt and just throw everything out the window and litter and throw the spoon with it. But anyway, I notice stuff like that because I'm focusing. I become very visual when I'm bicycling, and so I love looking at beautiful scenery, looking for wildlife, looking for people. Like meeting people and stuff. I have to be careful. I got got to pay attention. I got hit by a car in town here a couple of years ago, and so people don't always look for me. I'm like the invisible gorilla sometimes.
Do you have your handlebars down all the time?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
your
they aren't the
head's
kind that
down, your
move.
tail's up.
Huh?
Your head's down and your tail's up.
My with my bike I've been riding, the hybrid, I sit a little more upright, and so I can actually, it increases my visual field, and that's probably another good thing for me. As I get older and my eyesight gets more poor. But anyway, I've had a good time previously bicycling in Tennessee. This last trip, we were very much focused on recording, and it was also very wintry. And so much of the time during the recording process, I was inside all day long. And then on the trip back, it got to be really beautiful weather, and so I did some cycling on the way back. I took my time driving back. I took some side trips to North and South Carolina, and then just wandered back leisurely and was able to bike a little bit in the nice weather. But I've also, other trips, one time I bicycled from here to Austin, Texas, and so I rode from North Tennessee all the way down to Memphis and into Mississippi. I found Highway 51, which goes through Bloomington and Decatur and Payne, I think, Vandalia. Anyway, it goes all the way to New Orleans, I believe, but I took it all the way to Memphis before getting on the famous Highway 61 that Bob Dylan wrote about. And Highway 51 through Tennessee is almost like an interstate lane for bicycles. It's the traffic is just like an interstate, but they have signs up everywhere. This lane reserved for bicycles, and it's hilly, but it's beautiful, beautiful pavement, and I like riding in those kind of conditions. I know that the big trucks zoom by pretty fast, and so you can get a wind effect. But other than that, it's fairly safe because you have so much room.
Yes, we're looking at an old road which parallels 72 from Champaign to Decatur.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an old road that parallels it, old Route 47.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that if it could be labeled as a shared road, that it would be very handy to get into Decatur. We might not be on the expressway as you were talking about, but we'd be on a parallel road that's been somewhat retired because of the expressway.
It's interesting. Sandra and I were in the north part of Illinois on a bike trip once, and we ended up on Highway 47 where there was like almost no shoulder and big trucks zooming by. And we stopped at a bike shop and asked, is there any good way around to this? And they said, well, why don't you just take the path? And we didn't know there was one. The Fox River path is right by there, and that's a beautiful bike path.
Yes. It's, I think, also it uses railroad, too.
I think it probably does,
And the backyards of the people who backed onto the railroad have become the front yards, and there's across the drainage ditch to the railroad, there's little bridges, and there's plants, and the plants run out onto the tarmac, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, we love that.
I think it's upgraded the price of those houses.
Now, that particular year was also a year of heavy rainfall, so there was a little bit of flooding on it that I think it wasn't so deep that we couldn't just ride through, but it also resulted in a whole lot of gnats, and so we encountered both standing water and bugs.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your Florida trip.
Okay, well, this is the third time that I've gone down to Florida with Sandra, and with various combinations. The first time we just went down with my stepson Kyle, and he was younger then, and we met my family down in Fort Myers Beach, and I did a lot of cycling then. I rented a bicycle and rode like 50 miles, I think it's 50 miles round trip to Sanibel Island and back. And that's a great ride because you see dolphins on the bridge across, and then you get to the island, you see alligators and all these beautiful birds. And so I did a lot of biking then. Then last year we were a little bit kind of in between there and Tampa and did some biking again. Actually drove to Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel, and then did some biking on the island. And by that time we had our more nuclear family with us, Kyle and his partner and the kids, so 3 kids, including at that time a 2-year-old. He's 3 now, almost 4. And we always take him biking. We have a bike seat that attaches to the back of one of our bicycles, and he loves to go bicycling. And he just rides and talks and looks at things and falls asleep and wakes up and then asks if we can go to a playground.
Is
And
that one of the bicycle trailers that has you can power, so he can contribute to the power?
well, no, we have like several different devices. We have this is a seat that just clips on and it's locked in very securely, and then he's strapped in, wears a helmet and all that. We also have a trailer that he can sit in. That stays mostly at his house with his dad and mom. And then we also have this other trailing bike that he's too small for, but the other kids have used before, and it actually hooks on the bike, and it has its own seat and pedals and even gears, 5 gears. And so the kid who sits in back can actually feel like they're riding a tandem bicycle. And if we took one of our what we call bonus grandkids on a lot of rides with that. He's kind of lost interest now, but he would sometimes be really into pedaling because he made him feel more grown up. Then sometimes he would not be into pedaling at all, and so he would contribute nothing to the drive. But he's like, as a very little kid, he rode like 16 miles with us. Like he's a very durable young guy.
Uh-huh.
And then the 3-year-old Eli, he loves biking. And so this last trip we were in Kissimmee, and we did some bicycling around there, and found a nice bike trail that we took Eli, the 3-year-old, with us, and partly wooded areas where we saw tons of those beautiful Florida birds, and then it also wandered through town, and so we could stop for ice cream and things like that. And then I had some interesting, rather frustrating experiences with Google Maps and bike trails, which isn't the first time. Google Maps helped get me from California to New York, so I'm grateful for Google Maps, but every so often they'll do something bizarre and send me off on a road that you can't even tell it is a road. It's so desolate. And in Florida, on 4 different alleged bike path destinations, ended up being dead ends. One had been closed for years. One was actually a path through a golf course in private property. Another one was, I couldn't tell what they were referring to. I didn't see a path anywhere. It was just like a suburban neighborhood in a cul-de-sac, so I don't know what it was. And then the last one actually was a nice path, but it was closed because I was doing this on New Year's Day, this particular one, and so I couldn't get in. So I had some kind of frustrating bike path experiences that particular day. But then I found just a bike, not a path, but a bike lane, and rode it through some kind of ponds and marshes, and found tons of beautiful birds. I was looking for alligators, but I didn't see any this time. So I had a couple of good days bicycling down in Florida. Not so much because we had 4 kids with us, ranging from 3 to 12, and so they were into lots of different things. It went very well. We were able to navigate everybody's agendas pretty successfully, but they took a lot of attention, and so I didn't do what I normally would do, which would be take off either by myself or with Sandra or with Eli and just bike everywhere.
So you're a counselor.
Yeah.
Tell me, how do you talk to your clients about bicycling? And now that we have a trail coming up between Urbana and Danville, how do you suggest they might think about that?
Well, there's lots of aspects of cycling for me that I think are very healthy mentally as well as physically. And so I was thinking about that on my bike trip because a lot of, I joke, it was almost like a personality test, like people's response to hearing that I was going to ride my bike from coast to coast. Like a certain personality person would say, "Are you crazy?" And I hope you don't die out there, in particular my mother and mother-in-law. And then a lot of other people were more, another group of people were more like, "Oh man, I wish I was doing whatever my quest is, or whatever. It might not be bicycling." But it did sort of like encourage me to think a little bit like, why do I do that? Why do I choose to do that? And I discovered all sorts of things, or at least identified all sorts of things that I think are healthy about it. And so it would be the kind of thing I would recommend to clients, although it might not take the form of bicycling for them, although I certainly model that and encourage it.
Whatever passion
Yeah, they might have a different passion. For them, it might be rock climbing or swimming or running marathons or whatever, or something not athletic at all or whatever. But just for my cycling, I talk about like the health benefits of exercise. It's like a treatment for every kind of presenting issue in my field. For people with depression, exercise is like an antidepressant. For people with anxiety, exercise is an anti-anxiety intervention. I mean, for anger management, for stress management, for dependency issues, for anything, it's exercise is great. I mean, there's biochemical reasons and just like kind of shifting one's attention and feeling good about what you're doing, and so those are benefits. There's getting out in nature is a recommended thing to do for just about any presenting issue if somebody's physically able. New experience, novelty, taking risks, solving problems, like going on a bike trip. You have to be prepared every day for things not to go how you expect. And so how are you going to negotiate that? So that's a good thing. Interacting with different environments, different cultures, because you encounter people. On the Katy Trail, you might not encounter too many people in some parts of it. It can be pretty lonely. Like when you hit a town, it's a very small town. Yeah, it is. I encountered that a lot this year, too. I crossed that trail multiple times this year, both on bicycle and by car. And so, and I could go on and on. There's just, lots of different healthy aspects.
Have the cerebral people with electronics on their head riding bicycles to see how the brain is operating.
Oh, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's research like that where people are studying brain electrical activity or processing of proteins and sugars in the brain or what. I'm sure that they do that kind of research. I'm just not real familiar with it. But I thought when you said electronic devices on their head, I thought you were going to talk about people with their plugged into their different social media and stuff.
We've been developing the trail more or less up to Rantoul and around, and we've been thinking of putting a iPad on the handlebars. So as you come to a certain place, you can stop and you can get a rough idea of where you're at and what you're talking about, and then if you're necessary, you can punch a button and get more details about it.
Well, that's only going to happen more and more, so I think that's a good idea to do that. I may have mentioned this last time we talked on your show, but when I had the idea of going on my cross-country trip, I thought I was going to unplug completely, and then almost right off the bat got hooked into posting on Facebook because the first thing I did, Sandra posted a map of my route on Facebook, and then all these people responded to that, so I reposted it and I responded to some of their comments. And the next thing you know, I'm checking in the next day saying like, well, here's where I am on the path. And then the next day it's like, oh, guess what I saw today? And then I started posting pictures like, here's me and in the middle of the desert, And so it turned into like an important part of the experience, having this daily, or sometimes more than once daily, contact with these people via social media. And it turned out to be a good thing. I became more respectful of the positive aspects of that experience.
I was also thinking that you have wheels, and people who are disabled often have wheels, and they can get about. Older people can have a bicycle with two wheels on the back so they don't flop over.
Yeah.
There are people who are confined to wheelchairs, and I think about that. And I think about people who are in their basement on a bicycle.
Yeah.
With a television set in front of them.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of variants here.
Well, I do see a lot of people who are disabled who bicycle. Some people who've lost their legs bicycle with their arms. I've seen tons of great athletic bicyclists who can't use their legs. And Yeah, I mean, when you go on bike trips, that's a different experience. And I know, Dave, you've done some of that. You encounter some interesting people, and some, many on bicycles, but many not too. And so that's, to me, that's a big part of the experience too. Just all the different people I meet.
So do you relate to music as you go past different? I can imagine if you're in the Southeast, your music would be, if your local radio program would be a different music than if you're in downtown New York or Long Island or something like that.
Yeah, I actually have not listened to a lot of radio while bicycling. I think because the times I've tried to do it were years ago, and the signal was so inconsistent that it was more frustrating than anything. Now I could tune into podcast radio or satellite radio, and it would be a different experience, although satellite sometimes gets interrupted too. But I do listen to music sometimes. For the first part of my bike trip this year, I didn't listen to anything, and that was good because I was listening to the environment. And then I started varying it up a little bit, and I would listen to a little bit of music because I was preparing for recording my CD for one thing, and so I would listen to some of my demo tracks and things like that. And but you're right, as you get into different areas of the country, that's a big part of the cultural experience is what kind of music you encounter along the way. And then there was this other really kind of unexpected twist on my long trip. I had mentioned to you off air that it becomes kind of a meditative experience because you may be lost in thought, but you're very much in the moment in various ways. And then that increases when you're doing something that requires a little bit of extra attention, like climbing. Like when I was going through the mountains, I would call it my mountain meditation because it's hard, and so like you're focusing on the here and now in this effort. And then when I'm biking in the rain, I call it my rain meditation because it's sort of like, okay, I'm mindful that I am getting soaking wet,
A drop of water running down your nose, and then you blow it off. So.
But that generalized other experiences, like especially like bicycling from, like I went from, I don't know, let's say Barstow to I forget, Ludlow in California or something like that. And anyway, so it's really hot, really dry. And so water becomes this like religious experience, It's like you're getting the gourmet 7-course meal, just getting a drop of water. And if the bottle had been frozen the night before, so you're getting like really cold water around the ice, that's a different experience from like the air temperature water. And so I noticed it's the same for breathing. Like breathing takes on this mindful experience too. And there's different variations of breathing. There's like slow, deliberate breathing. There's the kind of short breaths when you're climbing. And then sometimes I would sing, and I realized like, oh, singing is breathing too. It's just this kind of really pretty breathing, And so like that was a cool part of the experience, like being mindful of different things. Even my daily routine, I'd get to the end of the day and I'd go through my little rituals, and there would be comfort in those and get ready for the next day.
Ever take a mouth organ with you and sit down on the curb and play?
Well, that's something that Dave Witzani would do because he can play. I have several harmonicas, but I've never gotten really good at them. So I'm more apt to think about bringing a backpacker guitar or something like that and play a stringed instrument. But I've never done that with a mouth organ, though. But I've sung and things like that.
So what is your next trip?
I don't have one planned. I know that I'm not going to go on one that lasts as long as my summer trip because I was away from my loved ones for too long. And certainly that includes my wife Sandra, although she and I have a really good routine worked out where we do a lot of things like together and then a lot of things separately too, so we can check in and we can, she met me 3 times on the trip and that, things like that. But my 3-year-old grandson, I don't think he understood what was happening. All of a sudden I was just gone. And then when we met up on the Katy Trail, Sandra brought him to meet with me. It was very moving to me. And I don't know if he knew quite what to make of it. And it took him a little bit to kind of catch back up with being with me. And so I don't want to do any long separations that long for a while, but I go on a bike trip every year. Usually, Sandra and I go. We go on a 500-mile week-long trip where we usually start at home and go in a big circle and end up back at our house. And we've gone to every surrounding state and sometimes gone 2 states over. We've ridden to Cincinnati, for example, and so maybe something like that, or maybe we'll road trip out west and do some biking or something. I don't know.
So tell me a little bit about preparing for this. Do you run with a flag behind you, a triangle, or is there a safety thing? And do you repair your own bicycle, or do you have it repaired for you before you go? Give us a little bit on the mechanics of bicycling, because people here, this is really not a bicycle town. It's not like being in Holland where the bicycles have a start first. Here, bicycles are in jeopardy, especially if they're on Route 10.
Yeah, and I have gotten hit by a car here. One year I got hit 4 times. After going 20 years without getting hit at all, one year I got hit 4 times, and one time was bad. The other 3 weren't.
Well,
but
we had an accident just around the corner here.
Did you?
On University Avenue, which was pretty serious. The bicycle had come down and didn't have braking capacity to stop a quick.
Oh man, that's bad.
Ran right into the traffic. It wasn't the traffic's fault. It was the bicycle.
Yeah.
Was going too fast.
I know, and I actually, I mean, sometimes I will get a little frustrated with cars who are not being very cooperative, but I'm more apt to get frustrated with cyclists who are kind of making it harder for all of us, by not stopping when they're supposed to, or by cutting across or not paying attention or whatever. One thing that is not funny, but it's interesting, a few years ago, my sister called my mom, who called me because somebody named Kevin Elliott, who's the same age as me, was hit by a car on Highway 16 down between Mattoon and Charleston. And it's like, what? Same age and same name. Wow. One other thing I wanted to say before I answer your question about maintenance and stuff or preparation is I remembered that Sandra and I are planning on spending some time in New York City again this summer. So I'll be doing, that's one thing that's planned. We don't know exactly when or all the details, but we have a friend there with a house in Harlem who relocates to Colorado in the summer, and he's a musician friend, and he pretty much said, like, yeah, use my house. So so we're gonna do it.
New York has some retired railroads that even have some bicycles on them, I think.
Well, I'll be checking those out for sure. So as far as preparation, most things in my life that I'm passionate about, I'm also not very knowledgeable about. I mean, I know my job pretty well, my counseling job, but I'm not like a real well-informed cyclist or guitar player or WEFT DJ or anything. I get by and create my own style of things.
Journalist, Alan Steinberger we were talking about, would say that a book salesperson is a master of all trades. Not a master, but he knows a little bit about everything.
Yeah, and I don't even know a little bit about everything, but I know a little bit about some things. And with my bicycling, I fortunately have learned enough to change flat tires and do some basic things that if I didn't do that, I couldn't go on bike trips. But major maintenance I don't do. If I can plug this guy, there's this friend, Peter Coleman. He's a retired machinist who has a bike shop in his house, in his garage. And I think Peter's probably about 80. I don't know how old he is, but anyway, he's a great guy, and I always take my bikes to him, and he tunes them up for me before trips, or actually just when they need tuned up, or if they need any other kind of thing done to them. Sandra has her favorite bike is this hybrid Cannondale, and a few years ago it got stolen, and somebody just totally trashed it out. I think they stole it just to vandalize it, and they destroyed just about everything on it. And then my stepson Kyle found it, and we took it to Peter, and he essentially rebuilt it. Like component by component, and now it's Sandra's favorite bike again, although we've left like the black paint that was spray painted all over it just for character. But anyway,
Sandra's an artist, so
yeah,
she would enjoy that.
Yeah, right. And so, I asked Peter to do most of my preparation. Now, I do things like, I didn't used to like to have a flag, but on a long trip, I put a flag behind me. And I used to pull a trailer But this last trip, I decided to go with panniers and just bungee a sleeping bag on there. And I didn't even camp out, but I had the sleeping bag just in case. And so it was
down sleeping bag, so it doesn't take too much room.
Yep, exactly. And then as always, I discovered that I was carrying more than I needed to. I even had like a little Surface, kind of like to use as a quasi laptop type thing. And I didn't use it because my phone really kind of accomplished everything I needed for connectivity and stuff. So, mid-trip, I actually got rid of quite a bit of weight. And I've done that on other trips too. And, but anyway, that's about the extent of my preparation. Make sure I have plenty of water. And
let me just ask you about organization. You ride by yourself often.
I do, yeah.
You can get in the middle of nowhere and have a gearbox clap out.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes depended on organizations. And other friends that we've had riding across country have belonged to a group that provide some service. They know where there are houses of repair opportunities, and the repair shop will probably come to you if you can't go to them.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your organization behind this. Do you have a bicycle group that you belong to? Do you promote bicycle ways locally, or tell me a little bit more about the organization behind this sort of movement for bicycling, where we're trying to get more bicycles on the road so that they're visible and so that drivers know that bicycles exist.
Well, I think I could do more in that area. I think I do a good job of promoting, and raising awareness, because I tend to, when I do my bicycle things, have some visibility, because I usually talk about it on your show and do other things that bring some awareness. But I haven't really been involved in lobbying efforts and things like that. And as far as like belonging to organizations, I haven't, at least not in a while. I think I did at one point join an organization, but then never used it. But I'm well aware of like Adventure Cycle. Is it cycle or cycling? I don't. But, so I know how to access stuff like that. There's also this thing called warmshowers.com that people sign up. And if you sign up, you agree to host cyclists who are on the road if they come through, although you can always say no. And then as part of the deal, you get to call up or email people, and you're on the road, and see if you can stay with them. And so I checked that out, but I didn't actually need to use it, so I didn't use that, but that was always an option. And then nowadays with mobile devices, you can access just about anything. And so I knew where the bike shops were along the route, which quite honestly were not very many. Going through a lot of the places I went through, you were lucky if you had a tree, much less a bike shop.
Rail trails, one of the main talking points of rail trails is that they upgrade small towns that often have lost population, and so they could put in a restaurant, they put in a bicycle shop, and they put in a little museums, and it's very positive. And there's like 1,500 of those rail trails now, so they're doing something to increase the awareness of bicycles. Yeah,
I think they do, and I think they do increase commerce. Most of the towns on the Katy Trail are very small, although you do go through Jefferson City and pretty close to Columbia, and then end up in St. Charles and places like that. But a lot of them are very small, but they almost all have a store, and many of them have a bed and breakfast, and like you say, sometimes a museum or historical society or something.
We're at the end of our show.
Oh, my gosh.
And we have to thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure. Time has really flown by.
Since we do have all of 3 minutes to go, I've been waiting to ask this. So do you bicycle in the weather like this, where it's just now, it's not really particularly cold, but most of the non-major streets are still snowy? Do you actually bicycle in the last week or so?
I haven't, but before I have. Like last winter, I think, in anticipation of my trip, I biked a lot. The last 2 winters, well, the winter before last, I was in the hospital for a while, so I couldn't bike then. But last winter I biked a lot. And Sandra and I have a little cabin up by Oakwood, and so I would ride my mountain bike sometimes through the snow, and I'd be the only track. It would be like, you could barely get my truck in there.
Wow, so you're saying that you've got like 3 inches of snow or 2 inches or whatever, and you're just, I can't imagine doing that because, again, with skinny tires, that would be that would be as bad as gravel as far as trying to keep traction.
Oh, yeah. Even with the mountain bike, it was kind of treacherous. I didn't do it in a way that was unsafe, and sometimes I would
Just get off
swerve, and sometimes I get off my bicycle and push it. But I have. In recent years, I've done a lot of bicycling in the snow and certainly in the cold. And I really love bicycling when it is snowing. It's a kind of beautiful experience if you have good gear.
But it's interesting that you're at Oakwood.
What's that?
You're at Oakwood.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is on the trail, the Kickapoo Trail.
Yeah,
we're to the south or to the north.
We are in south and a little bit west.
On the river.
Yeah, on the Salt Fork. Yeah, right on the Salt Fork. Yeah.
So does your passion for bicycling transfer to canoeing and things like that?
Yep. Yeah, we canoe and we kayak and we hike and yeah, it's beautiful.
Thanks very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board.